Kenya, and Somalia.
It's your
And
boy,
this has been reported as a climatic event not seen. That this is in the record of the
Panchi America, Panji Dwal, Panapan Pantalek stay the Panchi America, Panji Dwal, Panapan walk on the lake, Kankaru, what on the watching, Oga level leg, Gear, Pow, Leg, Panda with Yay, Panchi America, Panya Dwalavan, Chingatonga Pandon, could you buy a check out, Panda Giro, what they are be Dwalaventing.
To the neighboring countries. So water is such precious. It's like gold in this context, especially in countries in the desert. Now, here is, I'm coming to my conclusion, and we need to define what we are talking about, is water insecurity. And there are four main sources of the water security in South Sudan. One, seasonal flooding due to the Nile flow from the equatorial lakes and the local rainfall. Limited access to safe water due to limited and reliable water supply. Families are in the submerged water, but they don't have clean drinking water. The third is extractive industry pollution, leading to serious water quality and public health issues. And then there is transboundary hydropolitics with potential restart of the Jonglei Canal pursued by Egypt with the backing of Sudan. This again is a major threat if it has to be pursued. And we will talk about that later if time is allowed. Conclusion. On this particular presentation, because I will have another presentation later, the one recommendation here is that South Sudan is in a unique situation so that it can allocate 10 to 15% of the national budget. And they can learn from Egypt that prioritize water as livelihood and have a significant portion of their budget. And this has to start with the study. There are institutions that have labs. There are institutions that can give our national expert opportunity and our relevant ministry to collaborate with them, to do a study, a long-range study, to model whether we will have more water or less water. And they can model from the present today to the mid-century, 50 years from now, and even 100 years from now. Once you have the result of that modeling, that you were a co-partner and a co-producer, it means that this data belong to you. It gives you leverage when you talk to all other countries in the river basin. But if they feed you with their own data, they come with their own project, they come with their own operators, they come with their own machine, that is called monopoly. And it reminds us of imperialistic behavior that happened 100 years ago. But if you have your own data, produced by your own daughters and sons, who are trained and scientists in partner with international organizations that does the modeling, and you have the result, that give you the leverage as a country. This is the example of the large-scale hydrometeorological model. We can do this throughout over the whole Nile basin, followed by the entire Sudd basin. This is just an example of that modeling. Again, I hope that we will have more time to talk about the Jonglei Canal, so many consequences and pros, and so also dredging and many other issues. Once again, thank you for your attention, Your Excellency, and all the honorable members.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deng Majongchol. You can see how precise and concise academics are. Your Excellency, Taban Dengai, you are welcome. As you've seen, I think Mr. Deng has already set the tone. He's talked about the overall global climatical changes and the patterns, history of patterns of floods and droughts within South Sudan, and also highlighted the large dependency on the Sudd, as you've seen in the pictures. He's also highlighted the issue of water insecurity and put across some recommendations with specific examples. So while we've set the baseline, I think we'll move on to Professor Touch Al-Kazim. I know that changes the tone of the agenda, but we would like to hear from him first because he's a little under the weather before we give him a chance to go and rest. But before he does that, I'd like to just give you a brief overview of who Professor Touch is. Professor Touch is a Canadian citizen. He's a retired professor. He has over 50 years experience in the area of water resources and water management. He has had continuous engagement with South Sudan since 1972, and he has traveled across from places like Wau, Lanken, Bor, and other places. And so Professor Touch has a special place here, and I think I'll give him the floor to share with you some of his experiences. Thank you very much. Prof, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and my greetings to a good number of friends who are sitting over there. We go a long way back with Dr. Riek Bashar when I came here as a lead consultant to work on security sector reform, and he was then the vice president of the country. He took charge and he said he was the focal point, and we did our best to do that project. With General Taban Deng, we have been in contact virtually, and I hope that I will have the opportunity to communicate with you in person if you will give me the honor and the time. Madam Angelina, we go a long way. It is always a pleasure to see you and to see all of you here. Right. Before I do the presentation, I want us to manage our expectations. Consultations are not feasibility studies. So as Dr. Riak said, and I came late, and I apologize, I came late. I had a health problem and I had to go to hospital, but I'm fine now. The objective of these discussions and presentations is to lay the foundation and lay the grounds for informed decisions so that the government, the executive and the legislative can make the decisions on sound, solid scientific basis. In the studies of water, there are two main sections of water science: hydrology and hydraulics. Hydrology with a Y is the Q, the discharge, the quantity of water. Hydraulics with a CS at the end, that's the energy in the water. And there are a few other things here and there, but those are the two main bodies. I also wish to mention the spider and the web. The spider is the floods. The spider is the Gule Canal. The web is all the water and the water sciences and the water issues in South Sudan. And you cannot really deal with the spider without dealing with the web. And this is one of the main objectives of these consultations, so that we create a web and then we can zero into the two spiders that we have. If we take the case of South Sudan, and let me just talk about Yungule Canal a little bit. I was very close to that file, especially at the time when late Gama Hassan was the commissioner for Yungule Canal. And I followed the sciences of it very closely. The canal started, the idea started in 1904 as a colonial project, 100%. A British fellow who was in charge of hydraulics and water in Egypt came down, took a look, and he decided that he's going to drain the sea and give the water to Egypt. And at that time, the scenarios were either let us dry most of the Sudan, that would have given them 10 billion cubic meters of water. And then they said, well, there are people living on the wetlands. So they came with a figure of anything between 4.4 billion cubic meters to 4.8 billion cubic meters. That's the figure that's being talked about today. And I see no connection really between floods and Jungule Canal. The Jungule Canal was designed to siphon out water of South Sudan into the Nile and into Egypt. If you want to build a house, and you bring an architect, and then you bring a structural engineer, and then you bring a contractor, and then you bring the equipment to build a house. All that is designed for the objective. One cannot turn around the next morning and say, I am going to build a work, and I will use the same studies and the same drawings. So, Yungule Canal was designed to siphon out water. It was not designed to mitigate floods. If we wanted to mitigate floods, we need to do a study. And I will talk about the main elements of a feasibility study if it is to be credible and to be informative. The fact that we talk about ecology and we talk about, so there are 8 or 9 areas if we are talking about such serious matters, and I will address this in my second presentation at a later stage. Yeah. The catchment of the wetlands is estimated at 30,000 to 70,000 square kilometers, depending on the season. And there are different estimates as well. The actual flood reservoir is estimated at 30,000 square kilometers. 14,000 square kilometers of that is seasonal, with peak discharge around August. 16,000 square kilometers of that is permanently flooded with water from Lake Victoria and other sources. The estimated quantity of water in the Sudd is 30 billion cubic meters of water. That's 1/3 of the total discharge of the entire Nile at Aswan Dam, which is 85 billion cubic meters of water. Floods do not need canals. I mean, I never heard of it in my life. Over 50 years, I never heard that any nation built canals to drain water in a main passage of a river to control floods, especially if they are seasonal, and especially if they are a natural phenomena that we have got no control over. A British wise person said, for nature to be mastered, it must be obeyed. We cannot oppose nature. If the rain wants to fall, the rain is going to fall. Dikes are designed primarily through satellite imagery. You commission a company that works on that. They will tell you what the catchment, they will tell you the runoff, and you can actually calculate up to the quantity of water to be stored. From the 75, 80 Hafirs that I designed and the 30 that I implemented in South Sudan, that's what we were doing, including soil analysis. I mean, soil analysis is important because you take disturbed or undisturbed samples to see if the water is going to seep through or stay where you want it to stay. So there is quite a bit of engineering that goes into anything that deals with water. Dikes are designed to satellite imagery, identifying catchments, runoffs, and discharge. Floods are not rivers. They will change direction. The times that I spent with General Coleman Young in Bor, assigned to him by the World Bank as advisor, the floods, even just during those short periods, the floods were coming from different directions every time. So we also need to know that and study where are the possible different directions. Dikes are not done with a D7 or a D8 and then you just pile dust high and that's it. It needs to be designed. It needs to be done properly for it to be sustainable and to live for a long time. And then it needs maintenance. A little bit north of Bor, there was a dike. It was built fairly well, but through the time it deteriorated. Once you repair it, it will act as a dike. If there is a will, professional consulting and technical advice, funding, expertise, floods can be prevented through dikes. Yeah. All right. I just want to digress a little bit here because about 50% of our population in South Sudan are either pastoralists or relying and dependent on pastoralism, a very large percentage of the population. And as we said, Hafirs are not ponds. Hafirs are dams that need to be studied, designed, and constructed in an engineering manner. How long can it live? The sedimentation in places like Jungule Plains, there is 20 centimeters of sedimentation every year. You build a Hafir of 4 meters depth, in 1 year it will be 3.8 meters, in 10 years it will be 2 meters only. So we have got to cater for that and every now and then do the proper maintenance. Capacity, I have seen Hafirs that are literally a hole. You design the Hafir so that it suffices the needs of a certain population, human population, domestic animal population, and wildlife population, and there are ways to calculate that. Also, our pastoralists, they follow grass. And there is a term that we use, building Hafirs in series. You don't just build one Hafir simply because the people ask for one. You might be causing trouble there. So you need to track where do the pastoralists go and then build the Hafirs in series so that as and when the cattle stop for drinking, they find another Hafir ahead of them. It is DD. DD. Yeah. In 1992, Canada came out with the concept of rights and benefits. And they were asked to study the situation. How do we resolve the needs of Egypt while the upstream countries get some rights? Because the 1959 agreement, which is a horrible agreement actually, divided the total discharge of the Nile between two countries out of 11. 55.5 billion cubic meters of water went to Egypt and 18.5 billion cubic meters went to Sudan. And there is a clause in there that even if in the future there is more discharge, it will be divided between those two countries, and the upstream countries can go and eat coal. So we need to study those agreements. And I mentioned the other day two cases, the Bakassi Peninsula case between Cameroon and Nigeria. Nigeria sometimes back took their army and walked into the Bakassi Peninsula, very rich in oil, just annexed it overnight to Nigeria. And as we speak now, they are pumping out oil from the Bakassi Peninsula, which is 100% Cameroonian. The International Court of Justice ruled that Nigeria should give back the peninsula to Cameroon. And then Kofi Annan sometimes back brought in General Obasanjo and brought in the President of Cameroon and the representatives of all the 5 members, the permanent 5 members in the Security Council, and signed a new agreement. Still, there was no implementation. And if you go to Badme, which was the fight between Eritrea and Ethiopia, if they give me Badme and they give me $1 million, I wouldn't take it. There is nothing, absolutely nothing there. However, when Badme was to be decided by the Court of Arbitration, it was the colonial agreements that helped them to get to that decision. So I would strongly suggest that we study the main 9 Nile agreements. If they are not available, they are in my archives and I'm willing to share them. We need to start full research and study international law on water, which is very weak. It started with the Helsinki rules, and international law, it is a big name, but it should not frighten anybody. It is really a paper tiger. If the country does not want to oblige to international law, nobody will arrest someone and put him to jail. So the goodwill of the country is the main implementation tool for international law. We need to build a library, and that is the library concerned with water issues. I would have wished if His Excellency, the Chief of National Security, was with us, because water security is part of national security. No doubt about that. Just look around what is happening on Jordan River, what is happening on the Tigris and Euphrates, and all that mess between Israel and Jordan and Syria and Iraq and whatever have you. So we need to qualify, re-qualify water issues in South Sudan as a security issue, and that water is part of the security of the country. To build a library, the archives are in 2 places. They are in the British Archives in London, which is very close to number 10 Downing Street, and any of us could actually apply to them to get copies. There is a little charge that they charge you, but they will give you what you want. And then the University of Durham, the northern parts of the UK. The University of Durham has the largest archives in about Sudan and South Sudan, outside of the archives of Khartoum at that time. And there are some archives that in the University of Durham that are not even in Sudan, but they are approachable. And I would take this as probably a primary recommendation, because knowledge has value. If we are talking about the water just with these 2 issues, what about the rest of the water? What about the future? If there is any need for help, I did a little bit of thing with Brother McQuay before, when I was here in 2008, and I gave a presentation in his office and to his undersecretary, but that was a long time ago. There are also 27 major basins in Africa that have got cooperative agreements. We are still not part of that. The Nile is the longest river in the world, and we don't have a cooperative framework agreement. And we know that the whole problem is Article 14B. If we follow the version of Egypt, there is no water left for anyone. If we follow the version of the other nine countries, then there is water for everyone. But Egypt has blocked that. Not only that, but they work hand and foot to lay down and to remove the cloud from the Nile Basin Initiative. If you go back to their yearly end-of-year report, 2021, 2020, 2019, there isn't a single word about the CFA, not a single line. How come? How come? This represents 9 countries. If you look at their plans, the CFA is not in those plans. The other issue that I would like to share with you is the 5 countries that have signed on so far are all lakes regions, what we call African countries. 4 of those have ratified. We need to sign and then ratify. If we can get 1 more signatory, and if 2 added to the 4 ratified, the agreement will enter into force. The Egyptians cannot do anything about it. How to implement it is something else. But as an agreement, as a legal entity, it enters into force. And there are questions here. I don't know if the questions came to you or not, but they came to me from different friends in different countries. Where does South Sudan lie? Does South Sudan lie with Sudan and Egypt? Or does South Sudan lie with their brothers and sisters, the next region? The choice is for our respectable government. South Sudan, as I said, needs to start that debate and where do they want to fit in the Nile Basin Initiative. Prepare to have policy on how to deal with the Sudd Wetlands. Sell, keep the rights, do nothing, but there needs to be a government policy that comes out of national consensus. I don't think that the issue of water is closed offices decisions. If we want to do that, because it impacts the life of every one of us, every human being is impacted by the policy of the water. And I would also add, there is a big difference between water policies and water politics. Our concern here, as experts, is water policies. The concern of the esteemed gentlemen and women is water politics after we inform ourselves of the water policies and what does the nation want and need. Also, when it comes to water politics, I would suggest that we look into what we call interdependencies. If somebody wants water from me, what do I want from him? What can he give me? And that needs to be equitable. You cannot give me $1 and take $10 away from me. You cannot give me something that's not permanent and take something that's permanent for me. So the value has got to be equitable. My second recommendation to the government of South Sudan is to stop dredging until a credible feasibility study is done. And in the second presentation, I am going to outline considerable details. What do we mean by credible feasibility study? I would recommend that the government of South Sudan, in both the executive and the legislative, to form an all-party parliamentary committee. Go back. Where did we go? Yeah. Form an all-party parliamentary committee on water resources, environment, and ecology. But it needs to be a party that has got teeth. It is not just meeting and talking and discussing and going away. It must be a party that has the competence and has the authority to at least outline policies. I would suggest that the executive is to appoint a knowledgeable legal advisor to the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation, but accountable to the Ministry of Legal Affairs, so that he does not become in-house, so that he's, I don't want to use the word watchdog, but that is what it is. He's there to make sure that whoever is taking decisions, that the decisions are taken from the right angle in the interest of the people. And let me tell you a frustration I have. I have been trying since April, since I ran from Brother Mariaba Marial, that I am to come to South Sudan. I have battled actually to get a copy of the technical agreement between South Sudan and Egypt for analysis. I could have been told that this is confidential. I could have been told that you only deal with page 1 or 2, but I have failed to get that. And I resorted to the people who are supporting me now, and none of them was able to get that. So we need a legal advisor within that ministry to give the people a beacon, to give them a sense of direction, that the technical is your business. When it comes to the legal, we have got a say. The Vienna Convention on Succession of States, that's a must study for us because it deals with the exact case of South Sudan. What happens to the previous agreements of Sudan with others when South Sudan was part of Sudan? And where does South Sudan stand now from those agreements? Nobody has an answer. We cannot jump up as if we are in a Lugara and say we do not recognize this and we do not recognize that. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. People will look at the crippling sanctions that we have now. So the world, the global north has got their own ways. They will not bring an army and bombard South Sudan, but they have got their own ways of dealing with these issues. I would also recommend that the government seeks about $100,000 to do both resource evaluation and update, modernize, and complete a water policy document for 10, 15, 20 years. Let us project to the future. I studied the 2007 agreement. One of the loopholes there, Sobat River was never mentioned. Not a single word. And Sobat delivers 15 billion cubic meters of water. That's about 17, 18% of the total discharge. And if we build a dam upstream on the Barrow in the Ethiopian highlights, we can generate up to 350,000 megawatt of electricity. Share it equally between Ethiopia and South Sudan. And then Brother Isaac, he updated the 2007 into 2009. I have a copy of that as well. He did a great effort in that. He plugged gaps, but still it needs more work. So my pledge for the vice presidents and for the ministers is to commission a body, get the people that you want, national, international mix, but do a targeted, medium-term, longer-term water policy so that we have a trajectory, we have a roadmap. Where are we going from here forward? This will take a team, probably about 5 or 6 people with different disciplines. It will take them about 2 years. And I'll conclude by telling you a little story that not many people know about the Rupel. This machine is called the Rupel, R-O-P-E-L-L-E, which is a French word. It was built by France, and then it was given to CCI, Company Construction Internationale, who brought it from Pakistan to do the drilling there. And then those who went into mutiny and became freedom fighters from platoon 104 and 105. Those are the ones who disabled this machine. They did not only disable it, they had instructions, orders to capture the Khawajas. So they captured 5 Khawajas and took them to Ethiopia. At that time, the late brother Justin Yaj was representing the SPLM-PLA in France. So he called me quite concerned because the French were pressuring him. And I acted as the liaison between Addis Ababa and between Dr. Justin. And Dr. John had a very brilliant condition. Yes, we disabled the machine. However, I think there were about 50, 55 Caterpillar pieces. A good number of them are D9s. The D9 is like a tank. It's like a T-62. So Dr. John demanded that he wants the entire fleet of the Caterpillar equipment to be delivered to him before he releases the Khawajas. And that's what he did. God bless you, and God bless South Sudan.
Thank you, Professor Touch. I think the follow-on presentation, he has presented some of the concerns and some of the questions that His Excellency raised in his remarks. So he touched on the Jonglei Canal, and he also mentioned that floods do not need canals, I think if I heard it right. He also looked at hafirs and dams, highlighted the rights and benefits specific to the Nile Basin Initiative. From his recommendations, there were 2 specific ones that I thought I would reiterate. One was building of archives, South Sudan archives, from the British archives and Durham archives. And I think he has his personal archives as well that he's willing to share. He also talked about the cooperative framework agreement that he says hasn't been signed yet, and recommends that it should be looked at. And then, of course, he reiterated that there's a need to fund the development of a water policy, but with a long trajectory, 10 to 20 years. So I think he also touched on rights and benefits and the international law, and I think that falls right into the area of expertise of our next expert, Dr. Salwa Gabriel Berberi. So before Dr. Salwa comes in, I just wanted to give you a brief bio. Dr. Salwa is a lawyer by training with a PhD in international law. She is currently a CEO of Berberi Academy for Training and Learning. She has been one of your colleagues previously, a former Deputy Minister of Cabinet Affairs. She has worked in the Office of the President as a national expert. She has also worked as the Undersecretary for the Ministry of Regional Affairs. But she has specific experience and expertise within the wide Nile rivers, and I think she'll elaborate later. And with that, I'd like to invite Dr. Salwa to give us an overview of the international law in relation to the Sudd Wetlands and the wide Nile rivers. Dr. Salwa, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, the First Vice President, Dr. Riek Machar, Dr. Wani Iga, and Comrade Taban Dengai, always pleasure to see you. The Honorable Ministers, the Honorable Governors, former Governors, and the honorable heads of the security sector, the deputy ministers. Good afternoon. I would like to begin by saying we have now come like a full circle on the issue of the White Nile waters. When all this started sometimes in November, I think with the visit of His Excellency Taban Dengai to Jongle, it started as an attempt or a plan to address the flooding that overwhelmed the state. And it started as an infrastructure approach on how to solve the floodings. And today we are talking about the White Nile waters. And thanks to the wisdom and good work of the President, that we have come to do this in a consultative approach, raising awareness, consulting one another, and looking at the issues that face the White Nile water resources. So from talking about the Nile, we are now very closer at home and talking about our own, which is the White Nile waters. And I think with that, if this exercise has only brought us to use the terminology right, that this resource is the White Nile, I would say that we have really succeeded. Because for all the last 17 years, when every time we talk about the waters, it is the Nile. Professor Al-Khazin says these are semantics, and he says that the Nile is a continuum. And I agree with him, but for third parties, not for South Sudanese people nor the South Sudan government. When we talk about the body of water that traverses South Sudan, it is the White Nile. And the White Nile in the form of its three mighty tributaries, Jabal, the Bahr al-Jabal, the Sobat, and the Bahr al-Ghazal tributaries. And these three also have their own systems. And I think with that, I would like to begin my my presentation. Why are we talking about international law? International law is body of principles, norms, treaties that govern relations between nations. And in the area of waters, it has done a lot of work to absorb tension from relations among nations. And the last attempt was through these cooperative agreements in all the major rivers of the world, so that especially the rivers that traverse more than 2 countries are governed in such a way that it removes tension and it creates relationships that are based on sovereign equality, territorial integrity, and so on. Following the Second World War, the United Nations embarked on an extensive and big project, and that is progressive development of the international law and its codification. Because the law is customary, it is built on state practice, what states do and what states don't do. In a progressive manner, these practices are developed into customary, stable, and settled rules. And in the process, the community of nations come together to codify them into the form of treaties and agreements, or sometimes exchange of notes. So what are the sources of this international law? I mentioned treaties, I mentioned customary international law, and also the writings of the scholars and researchers in all nations, those who have authority or have developed authority in the relations among nations. And the subjects of international law are states, although these days with big organizations like the United Nations, the European Union, Africa Union, Organization of American States, and so on, these have developed the character of having to qualify as international subjects. For the issues of tension and crisis among nations, peaceful settlement of dispute between states are more encouraged than to go into war directly. And there are techniques to do that through negotiation, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, good offices, and so on. Disputes among states beyond peaceful settlement can reach a court. And at the international level, we have the International Permanent Court of Arbitration. South Sudanese know about it because we have an experience during the interim period of the CPA. We went there for the ABA issue. And then there is the International Court of Justice. And recently, the international community has developed the International Court, Criminal Court. Decolonization impact on international law. The 60s and the 70s witnessed huge accession from colonial rule to independent status for many, many states in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, Caribbeans, and so on. And why do we talk about that? It is important because it has created at that point a conflicting relations between the colonial powers and those who are seeking independence. The colonial powers were worried about the treaty relations among nations. If they declare states independence, what will happen to the repertoire of treaties that a specific state has acquired during the colonial period? So the Community of Nations sought to codify a law for the making of treaties, and it is known as the Law of Treaties, 1969. Another important document, and Professor Al-Khazin mentioned it, is succession of states in respect of treaties. At that point, when Tanzania was seeking independence, Nyerere did not buy into the idea of you are gaining independence, it means you inherit everything that the colonial power did as a by the way of treaty making. And so he advanced the concept or the principle of the clean slate, clean slate. You begin from a premise that does not oblige you or bring you down to accept everything that the colonial power did in a treaty. And so the argument was that the newly independent states would begin with a clean slate and taking into consideration the treaties one by one and choosing which area of those obligations they are ready to meet and which areas they are declining to meet and taking them back to the colonial powers. Why do I mention this? I do mention this because recently we have acquired our independence through decolonization process, through the self-determination referendum which occurred in 2010, September 2010. So I think this is important for us to know where this comes from and why is it relevant when we are talking about the Nile Waters Agreement. The issue of the Nile Waters Agreement has always been controversial even when we were part of the Sudan. Even among the Sudanese lawyers and group of scholars in law, they always argue against into the minutes of the meetings where these were negotiated. In law, we call it travaux préparatoires, which is the working documents where these agreements came. We are going to get them anywhere except from the original colonial powers. And in that case, it will be Egypt and Britain. And the government can write to both of them formally through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs seeking the originals, because for such issues, you need to rely on the primary source and the authentic source for these documents. So I would suggest that not only the treaties themselves, but the archives regarding the White Nile waters with Britain, Egypt, and even Turkey before both of them. Also, we can ask Italy, we can ask France, we can ask Ethiopia, not because Ethiopia was a colonial power, but Ethiopia had treaty with Britain regarding the White Nile from the source of Nahr el-Gash, the Gash River. And that is important. Why? Because at one point, the government may need to look at all that critically and develop its own policy, its own strategy regarding the current discussions we are carrying on and on about regarding the Nile Basin Initiative and the cooperative framework agreement. These are very important. You cannot begin of what you have now in front of you. This has a long history, and you have to take it back until you get to the source. I've mentioned the colonial era agreements, and besides the 1929, why is it important? Because that is when the issue of ratio and shares started coming into the scene between Sudan and Egypt. And it was the British who started arguing regarding the shares of the White Nile waters. Another point important about the 29 is that the British developed a policy and declared it to the world and to Egypt that Egypt has natural and historic rights on the White Nile waters. And I think Egypt is using that to this day. And that is what is delaying their accession to the CFA, because they are arguing about the natural rights and the historic rights. And if you have been practicing that for decades and decades and decades, it won't be easy to give it up just because the realities on the ground have changed. For them, it has not changed in terms of their rights and their regards with respect to the White Nile waters. So I think beside Britain, the government should approach formally, officially, through Foreign Affairs, also Italy, France, Turkey, and I mentioned Egypt and Britain, and Ethiopia, please. Now, regarding the international law of transboundary rivers, before I start about our own, I would like to state two things. And in the consultations of the 3 days and yesterday, these are one of the lessons we have learned, really. Most of us are not hydrologists or hydraulics or working with the water specialists. So we have learned that the sources of waters for South Sudan are four: the surface water, the transboundary water, the aquifers or the groundwater, and the precipitation, which is rains and hails. And I think that is important because when I talk about the international law of transboundary waters, The White Nile is exactly that. The Nile from a point in Lake Victoria all the way to the Mediterranean Sea traversed 10 states, and it is transboundary because of that. So the White Nile sector of the Nile are regulated by a series of documents that started developing or codified, rather, not developing because there have been practice among states, but that have been codified. We start with Helsinki rules in 1992, and these have really detailed certain norms that regulates this kind of body of waters, the transboundary. And then the Berlin rules, also 1992, worked on that even further. The United Nations Economic Commission for European states also. On the development and rules and norms of law in that field. And I have witnessed the thorough and greater and detailed arguments and discourse among different nations, be them members of the transboundary or the broader community of nations, because they feel it is true they are not a ribarian state, but it is also of interest to their countries and to their peoples. So that is what the International Law Commission did, the non-navigational use. What we should underline here is that the navigational uses are within your sovereign rights. So anything you do with respect to navigation on the White Nile River or the White Nile tributaries here in South Sudan is within your rights. You don't need to talk to anybody. You don't need to inform anybody. These are within your rights. There are three established norms by now, and they are part of the core key rules of international law in this regard. The first one is the equitable and reasonable utilization. The second is obligation not to cause any significant harm. You are not going to build any chemical industry factory along the river or in the river. You are not going to establish a nuclear power plant, because these are very, risky. And it could, at any time, if there is an accident, the damages and the injuries would go beyond your territory and it may affect the waters. So for the non-navigational uses, obligation not to cause harm is key. The last, and which is very important, is the obligation, the duty to cooperate on the basis of sovereign equality, territorial integrity, and mutual benefit and good faith. I think this is what brings us to the critical area of relations between South Sudan, North Sudan, and Egypt. Not only because these are downstream, but we also have obligation to those who are upstream, the other states. And this is where we need to talk with them, with Egypt especially and Sudan, on the issues of ratios and shares. It is true, if we go to the Nile Basin Initiative and the Cooperative Framework Agreement, that will be a clean cut, and it means that we are finally home and free. But from their point of view, especially if they don't join, and especially if we have not followed up on storing reservoirs and water for our own use. The water that is running through here we can have a clean cut by ratifying the CFA. But from the point of view of Egypt and Sudan, they are both still under the 29, or rather the 1959, as far as Sudan is concerned. Egypt psychologically is still in the area of natural and historic rights. I am not saying this because I want to advocate or stand for Egypt or the Sudan, but I want to draw the attention of the government to the two sides of the arguments. And yesterday, I think it was Dr. Barnaba who mentioned that we have good relations with Egypt. And I think today it also came out clear that we don't have any issues with Egypt. And if that is the case, we really need to balance this and to talk about it. While we are doing this, we are following the general trend in the region, the general trend of the transboundary group. They are 10, and if 5 have already ratified and they are waiting for the 6th, and that could be South Sudan to tip the balance, we need to be doing some talking. We cannot initiate it. Those who have the interest would initiate it, but we need to be prepared. We need to prepare our arguments, our position, our final decision, so that when any of them approach us, we are ready. Now, utilization of the international waterway in equitable, no harm, and in a cooperative manner is a platform for identifying and integrating legal, scientific, and policy issues. And this is what I want you to be preparing for. And all this will be taking into account relevant factors and circumstances such as geographic, hydrologic, climate, ecologic, as well as socio-economic and the affected people, which is important. And in the area of affected people, not only the IDPs because of floods, but the host communities as well. because they too are affected people. Now, also among the things we learned in the last 4 days, because my paper is the White Nile waters regime, and the environmental group and the environmental scientists speak of ecosystems. And in both cases, regime or ecosystems, it is a group of network of systems that are interrelated and interconnected and affected by the White Nile waters. And I want to spell out some of these, like Bahr al-Jabal and its system, Bahr al-Ghazal and its system, the Sobat and its system, even including their creeks and khors. All these are relevant to the ecosystem. Al-Sudd, the mighty Sudd, and the Toj and the floodplains is part of this ecosystem we talk about. The fisheries, the wildlife, the birds that migrate certain times of the year, they are here on the wetlands. The irrigation, the food security area, the meteorology, we are talking about weather, climate, and atmosphere. We are talking also about evaporation and precipitation, which is our rain system and so on. Then we are also talking about floods, flooding and the drought patterns, the aquifers or the groundwater, and affected population, livestock, biodiversity, and so on and so forth. I think I won't now, because my attention is drawn to the time and that you people may be hungry. Before I leave the floor, I have two things to tell you. Gap in the national laws and recommendation to the government. If you look at the transitional constitution of the Republic of South Sudan 2011, you won't have anything reference in any of the provisions to the White Nile waters, to the underground resource, to the wetlands, and throughout the Constitution, no reference. Whether in the general principles, there are general terms, but no specific reference to these resources. Until you go to the schedules, Schedule A, in paragraph 29, there is a reference to the national, to the management of the Nile waters, transboundary waters, national rivers and lakes. That is the only reference, and within the meaning of the competent powers of the national government. When you come to the Arxis 2018, there is a reference, clear-cut reference. The Artigono shall develop a comprehensive policy for the use and management of South Sudan's water bodies, including but not limited to the River Nile. That is where we find. If you go to the national legislation, no national laws exist to govern utilization, development, management, and control of the White Nile waters, the groundwater, and the wetlands. Now we have embarked on preparations and drafting of the permanent constitution. The process is going on. I think this is the right time that the law gap can be bridged so that it includes clear constitutional provisions on the White Nile waters, the groundwaters, and the Sudd and other wetlands. What can Artigono do? Artigono, the executive, could collect primary and authentic sources to analyze, assess data, statistics, satellite images, technical studies on the White Nile water resource, its ecology and ecosystem. It could also gather primary source and authentic records, archives, colonial papers, treaties, reports, maps, etc., along the lines I have explained earlier. Also, the government could review the Jonglei Canal project in view of contemporary knowledge, scientific research and assessment, environmental awakening, and public opinion. Commission current scientific research on environmental and social assessment on the impact of the Jonglei Canal on the White Nile waters and other wetlands, and on the groundwater and the other ecosystems. Commission also technical studies in climate on climate change, extreme weather phenomena, and their impact on the White Nile waters, the Sudd region, and the rest. And promote capacity building. I think this is very important. To promote capacity building in respect of the White Nile waters, the interdiscipline, and it should be interdisciplinary and integrated both institutionally and professionally as well. And finally, categorize and describe the White Nile waters job opportunities across the discipline, professional and technical grades. Earlier, there were questions about why do we use the term Sudd or Sudd in Arabic. I want just to say that the Sudd is now has transformed itself into a term of art. It is now on the dictionaries, the Oxford Dictionary, which is the English lexicon source or resource. You will find the Sudd defined. The same in the Merriam-Webster dictionary for the Americans. You will find it also defined. But if you don't want to say the Sudd, yesterday one of the experts said he's transforming himself from calling it the Sudd to the Sudd, because the Sudd is the word in English. But I think this is not a serious matter. But let us agree that it is the Sudd. I tried to Google the Toj. Toj have passed from the national language into the anthropological environmental fields. If you go to any book or article from the environmental science or studies, you will find the word Toj. If you go to any anthropological books or studies in South Sudan, you will find the word Toj, I mean, but you will not find it yet in the dictionary. And with that, I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salwa. To this point, Your Excellency and the Honorable Ministers, we are going to take our lunch break. Of course, we have got three other very important presentations which revolves around the environment and the environmental issues and its impact on the society, as well as the hydraulic patterns of our country. It's getting more interesting. That one will be immediately after lunch. We hope that some minute, 5 minutes to 2, we all are coming back. The arrangement is this: Your Excellency, the Vice President, and the three of our experts, including Taj and Deng Majok and Dr. Salwa, you will go to the VIP lounge, and then the Honorable Ministers, the buffet has been arranged in that corridor. We are aware of the space. The rest of us, Under Secretary and everyone else, ours is behind the hall there. So you are welcome. Thanks for your patience.
The Nile, the world's longest river, a 7,000-kilometer lifeline for almost 400 million people. Flowing north, the Nile runs through 10 countries, from the highlands in the heart of Africa to the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. A source of sustenance, but also one of tension, even potential conflict. These tensions between countries along the River Nile have their roots in the 19th century. Colonial decisions of the
your boy young I give him that time. Pancho leg stand Panchir America, Panji Dwal, Pancho leg stand Panchir America, Panji Dwal, Ban walk on the lake, Kankaro water no watching, Oga level leg, gear, wow, very leg, Panda with Yay, Panchir America, Panya Dwalabano, Chingatonga Pandon, could you ever buy a check out, Papu Panda Jiro, what they are be Dwalaventing. Stand Panchir America, Panji Dwal, Banaban Pancha leg stand Panchir America, Panji Dwal, Banaban walk on the lake, Kankaro Watana watching, Oga level leg, Gear, wow, very leg, Panda with Yay, Panchir America, Panya Dwalamano, Chingatonga Pandon, could you ever buy a check out, Paku Panda Gear, what they are be Dwalaventing.